Hi, YouTube. It's been a while, I know. So, I've been super busy, but really quickly, I just wanted to put some thoughts out there on this whole rape culture thing. Um, I'm having some difficulties with rape culture. I'm having trouble with my conceptualization of it. And I wanted to just reach out to you and ask if maybe out there, perhaps in the form of your response in the comments or a video response, can either help me out and help me approximate, a better conceptualization of rape culture, or perhaps if it seems people don't offer an adequate substitute for my current conceptualization, then the troubles that I'm having, it would sort of vindicate my view that there's something seriously wrong with the notion of rape culture. So really briefly, I'll introduce it. Generally, rape culture is defined as a social state of affairs where rape is pervasive and normalized by cultural attitudes. And these cultural attitudes being things like victim blaming and trivializing the severity of rape and things like that. So the first question I have is, what does a society without rape culture look like? And I want you to really think about this, especially if you subscribe to this notion of rape culture as a legitimate entity that has practical value when it comes to describing a certain state of affairs. What does it look like when this entity that we call rape culture is absent from a society? What distinguishing features does that society have? Now, one answer that might immediately come to mind, which I think is a very naive answer, is the society would completely be absent of any kind of rape. There would be no sexual assault, there would be no rape. It would be a society that just doesn't have rape, therefore it doesn't have rape culture. And in fact, what such an answer would be suggesting is that a single rape in a society per year or per 10 years or per whatever period you want would still constitute a rape culture. And I think that this sort of fails because this seems to be holding society to a utopian standard. I don't think that there will ever be a state of affairs. I don't think it's possible for there to be a state of affairs, at least not in an open society where we're not being monitored 24/7. I don't think that it's practical to aim for a society where there's absolutely no rape, or no theft, or no murder, or no mugging, etc., etc. So I think there's a problem there, which raises the question of, well, I'll get to it in a moment when I start asking about the baseline. Another possible answer is that it has nothing to do with rape necessarily. It's just the cultural attitudes, things like victim blaming and marginalizing people who've been raped and trivializing their experiences and so on. But I would argue that if this is your definition of rape culture, then in principle you could have a utopian society. Practically you can't, but in principle you could have a utopian society where there is no rape whatsoever, but there is still pervasive social apathy toward rape. You still have this pervasive sort of, rape is trivial, it doesn't matter kind of attitude. And so even though there are absolutely no rapes taking place in this hypothetical society, it still fits in the definition of rape culture, which is odd. So let's say that, the presence of, let's consider the culture component. Let's say you have a society where everybody gets raped daily, but the cultural attitudes don't normalize or trivialize or victim blame. This would be the other extreme. This would be a case where the cultural attitude is sort of the heuristic for what constitutes a rape culture. In this case, everybody is being raped, but the cultural attitude is not what is generally characterized as being part of a rape culture. So in this case, you have something that if you're going with just the cultural component of the definition, if you say a rape culture doesn't necessarily require rape, then you could have a state of affairs where everybody is being raped all the time, but the cultural attitudes are such that we don't have the rape culture under this definition. So hopefully you can see where I'm trying to get there. We have these two different extremes. So what this suggests to me is that the most useful definitions of rape culture would be ones that establish some baseline between these two extremes. You know, there is a sort of a threshold for the number or percentage of rapes, which, if crossed, would make for a rape culture. And I'm wondering where that baseline is at, and ditto for the social views. You know, how many people, you know, what's the threshold for the number or percentage of people who hold these views about rape, trivializing and marginalizing and so on. You know, what would you say is the percentage that's necessary, which, if crossed, would be the difference between a rape culture and a culture that's not a rape culture? And for that matter, I want to think about what counts. Before I do, though, let me see my notes here. Right, I have some questions concerning research. I've been looking around a lot for research on social attitudes concerning rape, concerning, you know, the victim blaming thing in particular. You know, I often hear this line that the first thing that a rape victim gets asked is, "What were you wearing?" I haven't found any hard evidence to corroborate it. I just keep hearing this line trotted out over and over again, but I don't see the corresponding evidence that this is true. I don't really see the evidence that this is a widely held view. So if somebody could help me out there, if anybody knows of any research that they could point me to, that would be great. Let's see. Okay, I want to talk really briefly about my suspicions of rape culture and the way it's commonly conceptualized. This seems to come from a sort of conspiratorial notion drawn up by, you know, Brown, Miller, and McKinnon and the like, about how all men conspire. You know, maybe not directly, maybe not verbally, but there's a kind of group tendency that's socialized, and that this tendency is toward raping women, and that the reason the socialization exists is for the purpose of terrorizing and subjugating women. I think, of course, that's bullshit, you know, and I'm not going to comment in this video about certain wacky ideas that come from certain departments, but this seems to be where the idea of rape culture came from, and I think that when people try to tone it down to make it more moderate, they run into some of the inconsistencies or that I think I've raised. There's some troubles here. I don't fully expect anybody to offer me an actual definitive threshold. You know, that's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. It kind of seems glib, to be honest, to try to put a number or percentage on the acceptable number of rapes and the acceptable number of apathetic attitudes toward rape. So I think there are problems there. I think that, at best, the concept of rape culture is, well, it's conspiratorial in the sense that Brown, Miller, and McKinnon conceptualized it. And at worst, it's incomprehensible. It's so vague that, you know, there's really nothing definitive we can say about it. We can't really identify a state of affairs where practically there is no rape culture. Finally, I want to talk about a couple of other things about what counts as rape culture. And consistently, I hear as examples of rape culture, this isn't everyone, by the way, but there are people who think that people like me, who want to try to have a naturalistic understanding of rape, who want to try to understand the tendency toward rape in terms of biology, in terms of why certain people are maybe more genetically predisposed toward raping than others. They think that this constitutes rape culture. They think that this is a form of normalizing rape, which I completely disagree with. I think, you know, they're falling prey to a naturalistic fallacy there. You know, getting mauled by a tiger is completely natural, but that doesn't mean, you know, it's a good thing. It doesn't mean that it's normal. I don't believe that rape is an institutional phenomenon in the way that Brown, Miller, and McKinnon seem to think that it is. I think that's crazy. I think that, you know, there's a very good reason why it's primarily men who rape, not women. By good reason, I don't mean, you know, it's a good thing. I mean that there's a more compelling, more parsimonious explanation for this than just, this kind of conspiratorial idea. The other one is materials offering preventative strategies. They say that if you offer material to potential rape victims to try to ward off rape, try to minimize their chances of being raped, you are in effect victim blaming, which I think doesn't follow as well. I don't think that anybody is ever responsible for their own rape. But I do think that it's a good idea to offer people materials that'll help minimize the chances of them being raped. And in response to this, you get this sort of glib bumper sticker kind of comment of, don't tell women not to get raped, teach men not to rape. I think that people need to think that through a little bit more. It's like, I don't lock my door and somebody steals it. Of course, it's not my fault that it got stolen. It's entirely the fault of the people who stole from my house. But, I could just as easily retort, don't teach me to lock my door, teach the thieves not to steal. I mean, this is garbage. So that sort of summarizes briefly my problems with rape culture. If you think I'm missing something, please feel free to correct me, either in the comments or in video format. And yeah, I'll talk to you all later. Bye.